President Donald Trump's administration has threatened to impose sanctions on the International Criminal Court personnel if the Hague-based court continues investigations into alleged U.S. war crimes in Afghanistan.
The message was delivered in the first major speech by National Security Advisor John Bolton in Washington. Bolton told the Conservative Federalist Society gathered at a Washington hotel that the United States would use any means necessary to protect its citizens and those of its allies from unjust prosecution by an illegitimate court.
Today, on the eve of September the 11th, I want to deliver a clear and unambiguous message on behalf of the President of the United States. The United States will use any means necessary to protect our citizens and those of our allies from unjust prosecution by this illegitimate court. We will not cooperate with the ICC. We will provide no assistance to the ICC, and we certainly will not join the ICC. We will let the ICC die on its own. After all, for all intents and purposes, the ICC is already dead to us.
Our U.S. Correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease joins us now to discuss this, as well as the U.S. Presidency of the Security Council this month that will see President Donald Trump preside over the Council for the very first time since assuming office. A very good evening to you, Sherwin. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, like Russia and China, the United States is not a state party to the court. So why is this speech by John Bolton significant?
Well, I think for a couple of reasons, Simphi. Essentially, this is the largest democracy in the world and one of the oldest democracies in the world. So to have a national security advisor use language like, we will not join the ICC, he could have stopped there. But he went on to say, we will let the ICC die on its own. After all, for all intents and purposes, the ICC is already dead to us. It's a very particular kind of language that one perhaps doesn't expect from a country like the United States, but this is a new era in geopolitics, and certainly it is being defined by President Donald Trump's America First policy. What this also says is that we don't care what the findings of this Afghanistan inquiry investigation is. Of course, it hasn't started yet. The ICC prosecutor, Fatou Bensouda, has essentially requested the judges to allow her to investigate possible war crimes by foreign forces in Afghanistan since May of 2003. And of course, this will cover a large tract of period, because this is one of the longest wars, if not the longest war, that the United States has been engaged in. As we know, there have been a number of atrocities committed by foreign forces, certainly attacks on hospitals and scores of civilian deaths and injuries. So certainly a case, Afghanistan being a party to the Rome Statute, has turned to the ICC for its jurisdiction in this case, and the United States of America outrightly dismissing this. And what it also tells us is that the cooperation that we saw under the administration, Simphi, of President Barack Obama, they did not join the court. They've never ratified the Rome Statute, but they did cooperate with the court. You'll remember in 2013, there was a DRC warlord, Bosco Ntaganda of the DRC, who was holed up in the U.S. Embassy in Rwanda. They handed this fugitive, who was indicted by the International Criminal Court, over to the court. The State Department in 2013 announced that it would provide up to $5 million for information that would lead to the arrest of fugitives, including those sought by the International Criminal Court. So although they were not members of the court, they cooperated with the court, and that now will also fall away.
And having said that, Sherwin, would it be correct to say that the United States is justified for not cooperating with the court? I mean, U.S. policy concerning the ICC varies. As I just mentioned, the Clinton administration did sign the Rome Statute in the year 2000, but did not submit it to Senate for ratification. And later, the George W. Bush administration stated categorically that they won't be joining the ICC. And of course, the Obama administration, did establish a relationship with the ICC, but only as an observer. Would it be correct to say that Donald Trump is justified by not playing through the gallery?
Well, justification is relative. I mean, it's justified for any sovereign nation to act in any way they choose. They can join a statute, and that would be justified. If they didn't want to join the Rome Statute, that I suppose we could also argue is justification for it. But if we go through their justification, maybe we will find even greater justification, Simpiwe. Well, they gave 5 reasons for this policy shift. First, they say the International Court unacceptably threatens American sovereignty and U.S. national interests. I mean, this is a national argument. The prosecutor in The Hague, they say, essentially has unfettered discretion to investigate, charge and prosecute individuals regardless of whether their countries have acceded to the Rome Statute. What that argument doesn't speak to is the fact that whenever the prosecutor wants to do anything, she has to go to a number of judges who have to make the final decision. Can I investigate Afghanistan? Judges will evaluate that request and then make that determination. The second reason they give, the International Criminal Court claims jurisdiction over crimes that have been disputed and have ambiguous definitions, exacerbating the court's unfettered powers. So essentially they're talking about a very powerful court that perhaps isn't warranted given the judicial legacy that the United States enjoys. Third, they say, the International Criminal Court fails in its fundamental objective to deter and punish atrocity crimes. I think there are many countries, even South Africa, that might agree with this notion. Since its inception in 2002, the court has spent over $1.5 billion while attaining only 8 convictions. So they're saying this is not, what the court is achieving doesn't really meet the amount of money that's being spent on it. The fourth reason is the International Criminal Court is superfluous given that domestic U.S. judicial systems already hold American citizens to the highest ethical standards. So essentially what their argument is saying, Simpiwe, is that the ICC being a court of last resort when national jurisdiction cannot attain justice for victims of a crime, they're saying, well, we don't have that problem in the United States. We will never need a court of last resort like the ICC because of the legal justice system that we have in place in the United States. And the fifth argument, and this is an important one, I think, the ICC authority has been sharply criticized and rejected by most of the world today. Of course, that is erroneous. Today, they say more than 70 nations representing 2/3 of the world's population and over 70% of the world's armed forces are not members of the ICC. And this leads us to the next point. Let's listen to what John Bolton said about African nations and their relationship with the ICC.
Several African nations have recently withdrawn or threatened to withdraw their membership, citing the disproportionate number of arrest warrants against Africans. To them, the ICC is just the latest European neo-colonial enterprise to infringe upon their sovereign rights. Israel, too, has sharply criticized the ICC. While the court welcomes the membership of the so-called State of Palestine, it has threatened Israel, a liberal, democratic nation, with investigation into its actions in the West Bank and Gaza to defend its citizens from terrorist attacks. There has also been a suggestion that the ICC will investigate Israeli construction of housing projects on the West Bank.
So I hope that answers your question, Simpiwe, on justification.
All right, well, I hope it does. Well, the Telegraph in the United Kingdom, Sherwin, describes John Bolton as a foreign policy hawk who will play to Trump's ego. Let's talk about these men in detail now, shall we? He argues on the one hand that the ICC is weak and flawed, but on the other hand, the very same ICC is posing a threat to the United States. That's a stark contradiction, wouldn't you say?
Well, he's also one of the chief enforcers of President Donald Trump's policies. His America First policy. Remember, John Bolton wasn't the original national security advisor. Michael Flynn was fired before him, and General McMaster was then relinquished of his duties, as they would say in the military. And so John Bolton has really come in at a time where perhaps President Donald Trump felt more comfortable in his skin as President of the United States, navigating those difficult waters at the beginning. And John Bolton is very much seen as a hawk that doesn't, like the United Nations, has been very critical of the United States being party to this multilateral fora. So it comes as no surprise that they would reject yet another multilateral institution, namely the ICC. Remember, we've seen this in terms of the JCPOA on Iran, on climate change, on the decision on Jerusalem. So this is par for the course in terms of what this administration is trying to achieve. They are rejecting multilateralism and very much enforcing unilateral actions, whether you're talking about tariffs, whether you're talking about geopolitics, or whether you're talking about the institutions of multilateralism that has come to define the global international order as we know it.
Well, President Trump will chair a United Nations Security Council meeting later this month during the high-level segment of the UN General Assembly. What should we expect from that?
I think you should expect everything, Simpiwe. President Trump is very unpredictable. You know, there are very clear rules that govern an open meeting of the Security Council. He, as a presiding officer, as the president of the council, will sit in the president's chair. He will welcome everybody. He will, use the gavel. But who knows with President Donald Trump what the focus of that meeting is going to be is on Iran. As you know, this has been one of the major foreign policy issues for this administration, notwithstanding the withdrawal from the Iran nuclear agreement that was brought into fruition by his predecessor, Barack Obama. In addition to that, they've imposed recently new sanctions on the government of Iran, trying to really undermine that agreement. We've seen the EU, European nations trying to bolster that agreement by helping financially for use of a better word. But essentially the focus will be on Iran. It's notwithstanding, and given the fact that the Iranian president will also then be allowed to speak at that meeting, who knows where this discussion could go on the greater geopolitical concerns in the Middle East. And I would expect that even the Palestinian issue and the great tension we are seeing between the Palestinians and the United States will also come into any discussion about geopolitics in the Middle East.
Should Donald Trump's sanctions on the ICC be implemented, how likely would that damage the ICC and to what extent?
Well, this is what he's saying, Simpiwe. If the court comes after us, this was John Bolton, Israel or other U.S. allies, we will not sit quietly. We will take the following steps. Among others, in accordance with the American Service Members Protection Act, we will negotiate even more binding bilateral agreements to prohibit nations from surrendering U.S. persons to the ICC, and we will ensure that those who have already entered are honored by our counterpart government. So essentially they're saying, whether it's a trade deal, whatever bilateral agreement we enter into with a sovereign nation, there will probably be a clause in there now that says, if you want this deal, if you want this trade deal, whether it's a GOA or otherwise, you have to ensure that if a member of our U.S. military personnel or a U.S. citizen is sought by the ICC and happens to be in your jurisdiction, that you will not hand them over. These are very serious implications. They also say we will respond against the ICC and its personnel to the extent permitted by U.S. law. We will ban its judges from entering the United States. I'd be very curious to hear what the ICC has to say about this. We will sanction their funds in the U.S. financial system, and we will prosecute them in the U.S. criminal system. I don't know where this goes. But it's very strong language from the United States. Language, a speech certainly, that can be used by states around the world who have been very critical of the International Criminal Court. John Bolton has laid out a 6-page case as to why the U.S. will not cooperate with the court, and this will help governments and regimes around the world try and undermine what it is trying to achieve, and certainly what the Rome Statute has laid out for itself.
And whether these latest threats will, of course, protect American constitutionalism and sovereignty is still a matter that we need to watch closely. Sherwin, thank you so much for your time. That was our reporter, Sherwin Bryce-Pease, our U.S. correspondent, live to us from New York. This is the Global SABC News.